Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. I'm not really sure where this video is gonna go because I realized it'd been a while since I had just sort of like a chatty book discussion or book topic discussion with you guys. And something I've been thinking about recently is this idea of problematic books, and are they always bad? So I guess I kind of want to maybe like try to arrive at a more precise hierarchy of terms or like series of descriptors for books that have content that is troubling or difficult or problematic. Whatever we agree that ultimately means. So I don't have anything really planned for this, so we'll just sort of see where my ramblings on this go, and hopefully I can edit this into something vaguely coherent. So I've been thinking about, essentially, I've seen a lot of reviews either on Goodreads or whatever recently, kind of panning books, and essentially their critique boils down to, well, this is really problematic, and therefore I'm giving it 2 stars. And I guess I just wanted to kind of think through, is there a place or is there space for books to have troubling elements to them that we can probably agree are problematic, but them not be bad books? Now, I think kind of the automatic example of this that comes to my mind is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, because that is a book that is basically about a child predator. It is told from his point of view, and it is in his gaze. So we are seeing through his gaze the sexual objectification of a child. And I think, usually, just like for context, usually sort of my personal line on problematic books is authorial attitude. So like, if there's something that is troubling presented in a book, and the author's attitude, or like what you kind of get in terms of like who the author is pushing you to root for or think is in the right, or is sort of the moral voice of the book, opposes those problematic elements, it becomes easier. So like, if there is a character who, let's say, maybe like, thinking kind of in our post-Me Too moment, maybe like there's a situation in a book where 2 people get really drunk and they end up having sex, and then the next day one of them feels like it was not consensual. And I mean, by definition it wasn't, because they were both drunk and could not give consent, but it's a difficult topic because they're both drunk, and there's probably not like, and in the situation the person involved does not have like active malice, you know what I mean? Like situations that we actually all face in real life where we can look at that and say like, that is problematic behavior. But if the authorial attitude is like, oh, well, like the person who didn't want to have sex was just asking for it or whatever, that is where we might say like, well, that's problematic. Like, you're not addressing the difficult part of the situation that you have created, versus if what the author then does with that is like unpack it, and like there's a lot of complex emotional, progression, and it is clear from the characters in the book and from how things are being framed that we're not supposed to just unquestionably accept that like, oh, well, but at the time you said yes, so it was fine. In that case, I think most people would give the author kind of a pass and say, well, this is meant to kind of like bring up a discussion, and it probably wouldn't get panned automatically. That being said, I have seen a lot of reviews where just a situation that involves any kind of moral gray or just like difficult ethical conundrums gets panned as just like, well, it's bad. Like, the author brought this up. This is a bad thing. I don't want to read about it. And reader response. Like, nobody should read books that they don't want to read. And like, if that's something you don't want to read in a book and that was enough to ruin the book for you, like, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I guess just for my perspective, that's not necessarily that useful of a perspective, because I'm more interested in how it is handled than that it is on the page at all. So like, there's that distinction that we maybe can make between like, is a problematic situation being in a book enough to just make it automatically bad? I think for me, I would have to say no, because I need more information about how it's handled. So like, maybe that's like my first distinction is like, do bad things happening in a book automatically, like troubling things, violent things, whatever things that I don't think are right or good in this world, do them existing in a book make that book bad or problematic? I'm gonna say not for me. So like, let's put that over here. Okay, so now we have a book where something exists that's problematic or difficult or morally gray or whatever. then I'm bringing in authorial attitude and saying, okay, like, how is this presented? Is the author approving of it? If that's the case, then let's put a pin in it and come back later. If the author is approving of it or not commenting on it, let's put that somewhere else. Let's say that from the authorial attitude, it's clear that the author is wanting to make a comment and say that that is something that they don't approve of or don't think is good, or it is clear from the overall arc of the book that that is something that is at the minimum morally gray, but like maximally is bad. For me, then, I would probably in that situation, like, let's take the example I was raising about a situation where there was not clear consent given in a sexual encounter. That would be something that I would probably flag in my review of like, hey, part of the thematic content of this is dealing with sex that did not have clear consent given. That would be probably more my approach in that situation, because if from the book it's clear that the author is wanting to explore this, to me, I don't feel like, we can assess how well the author explores it. We can assess, do we think that it was an interesting discussion about the situation that they raised, or did they fully explore all of the implications that they needed to in raising that situation? So like, we can have that discussion, but I don't think in that case I would flag that book as being problematic. I think I would just flag it as being something that deals with difficult subjects. And I mean, in the situation that somebody brings up a topic and then doesn't fully explore it, that is where I would start to maybe label it problematic. Like, an example that comes to mind for me, in a book that I actually otherwise enjoyed okay, I think it was called Wild Thing by Jessica Sims. It was the 4th or 5th book in her paranormal dating agency series, and they're very light comedic books, but she brought up this situation in the 4th book where basically the heroine was a changeling who was owned by a Fey Lord in another realm, and she was in our world to allow her to mature to full, like, changelingness, and then was going to be mated to another changeling that he also owned. So we're talking about slavery, and we're talking about forced sex. Like, that is, like, rape. Like, we're talking about rape, basically. And, like, I think that the author understood she knew that that was not a good situation, okay? Like, she wasn't saying, like, that's cool. She clearly was making that, like, one of the key emotional conflicts between the heroine, who is a changeling, and there was a saber-tooth tiger, actually, which, like, I always get excited when there's a random were creature around, so good job there, who was brought from a different primordial realm into our world to, like, guard her before she came of age, or like fully matured. And his conflict was that the Fae had all of the women of his species imprisoned, and that if he didn't do what the Fae Lord wanted him to do with the changeling, which is like guard her, he was never going to let the men wares get together with the lady wares, and in this world, if the men wares don't find their mate, they go crazy, basically. So like, that was sort of the dynamic she had set up of like, both of them have compelling reasons to try. They're at cross purposes, basically. And it's a romance, so of course they're going to fall in love. But I don't think she fully really unpacked how horrifying the situation the heroine was in was. Because yes, if these men don't get their mates, they will kind of go crazy. But like, literally, we're talking about somebody being enslaved and like raped. Like, that is what the stakes are. And I think that she often had situations in which the heroine would feel guilty for thwarting the hero because she was like, oh, they really want their mates. And I'm like, but girl, you're literally going to be like enslaved and raped. Like, I just don't think she made the kind of like parody of the stakes sufficient. So that to me would be an example where I feel comfortable labeling that book as problematic, because I think the author set up a situation that she wanted to explore and didn't fully unpack all the implications of that situation. And so it made it uncomfortable for me as the reader, because it was so clear to me who kind of had the higher stakes, or like more skin in the game, basically. And it didn't feel like the author was fully in on how horrifying that situation was. So that is an example of a book that I would feel comfortable calling problematic, because I think you've raised a really troubling scenario and then you have not fully addressed it. Okay, so then let's bring back these other two situations. One in which the author does not seem to comment, like raises really hard topics or morally gray topics and doesn't seem to address them at all, or seems to address them in like, I think that this is a good thing. So like, let's bring Lolita back into the conversation at this point. So I tried to read Lolita and just could not do it. That being said, I don't think that it's a bad book or a book that shouldn't exist or a book that is bad or wrong, or I wouldn't even call it problematic, because the project of the book is to put you in the mindset of a monster, and it does that. So like, if that is what the project of the book is, then to me the authorial attitude becomes somewhat voided, because I don't think that you can discern what the authorial attitude really is. You can discern that what the author is trying to do is to put you in a certain person's mind space or like in a certain point of view, and you can argue if that's something that is good or bad or should exist or should not exist. I tend to think of that as like, that is a distinctive artistic choice. It's not art that I want to put in my head, because a huge part of like what I read for is to have empathy for other people and like expand my understanding of like the human experience, and like that's frankly just not somewhere I want to expand to. And I have enough understanding of that kind of situation that I don't really want to dwell in it. So like, for me, that's not for me, but I don't feel like somebody who reads and loves that book is bad or problematic or like wrong or evil or anything like that. Like, I just would say it's not for me. That's another kind of exception I would want to carve out. And I don't think that problematic is really the right word to use for books where the difficult, bad, whatever word we want to use, situation is the point of the artistic project. That to me seems to be different than an author who has bad things in their books and approves of them. So then there definitely are those situations where you feel like the authorial attitude is kind of horrifying. And I think in those cases, I feel very comfortable labeling those as problematic. So like a great example for me from last year was Winter at Death's Hotel, where it felt to me that the author had an overly prurient and voyeuristic interest in showing women in sexual and physical peril. And it didn't, my sense of the authorial attitude was such that it felt like I felt icky reading it. And I have no idea what the authorial intent was, but my reading experience was that seemed to be the authorial attitude. That was my perception of the authorial attitude. And in that case, I have no problem labeling that as just like problematic. In my opinion, that is a problematic book because it is not self-aware of the things it's bringing up. And when it does bring them up, it doesn't portray them in a way that I think sufficiently addresses the implications of the situation. So like, that to me seems to be like, I'm fine labeling that problematic, and then also labeling it as just bad. Like, it's not particularly well written either, and I think the lack of self-awareness of it contributes to it being a bad book. And then I think that there's a lot of books out there, especially ones that are older, basically, where I think the author just isn't even aware that they've brought up something that today we would consider to be problematic. And those, I think, are really tricky to deal with. Like, what do you do when, 200 years ago, it was considered to be a completely reasonable situation that if your daughter got pregnant outside of marriage, you had to just shut her away forever, right? Like with this baby, that she was no longer welcome in polite society. Okay, well, that's just like what the culture was. So like, how do we really negotiate that? I mean, it is problematic, but is that, like, it depending on the quality of the work or the other elements of the book, is that enough to just totally write it off? I know that, for instance, like Jane Eyre, which is my all-time favorite book, there's been a lot of kind of like feminist critique of Jane Eyre in terms of like Rochester's attitude towards Bertha Mason. I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to give spoilers, but I'll just say that there's also an argument to be made, given the historical context, that his treatment of Bertha Mason was maybe like as compassionate as it could be, and definitely like much better than the reality of what people in the similar situation experience. So like, Does that excuse his behavior? Would it meet our standards of behavior today? Absolutely not. But then, I think that completely divorcing situations from their historical and cultural context does not seem to me to be the most helpful way to think about these things. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just sort of a case-by-case situation, and I think different people, I think that's a situation where I would tell people to follow their conscience, basically. Like, if it's a situation that really bothers you, and like, then it's totally fine for you to say, like, this, I cannot get over this, and like, this book is therefore bad to me. Like, I think that's fair enough. I think for me, yeah, it's usually just kind of a case-by-case basis. So anyway, so that was just sort of my like ramblings about the idea of problematic books making our problematic books bad. Like, I think in some cases, yes, because it belies an underlying lack of self-awareness on the part of the author that leaks out into other parts of the text. But I don't think that just because a book has problematic elements, even ones that we would like that are not checked and not fully explored, I don't think that means you can completely write off a book. I mean, even in the situation I brought up about that paranormal romance, I think a lot of the rest of the book was really entertaining and had interesting things to say about, like, what does it mean to be complicit, and what does it mean to be what is like self-determination in a situation where you don't have a lot of choices. Like, I thought there were other interesting things happening in that book, and I don't think I would say like I completely reject it and think it's terrible. I just think that there is a part of that book that is problematic, and I think I feel comfortable warning people about that and saying, like, hey, I think that the author did not fully confront the implications of the situation they set up. So I don't know. I think it's really case by case, and I guess maybe that's just where I'll end. After all of that discussion, I think like it's hard to come up with kind of general rules about this, because I do think that context is really important and individual reader response is really important, because I think different things will hit different people different ways. We're all different is basically what all of this boils down to. Anyway, hopefully that was vaguely coherent, or at least future me has edited it to be vaguely coherent, but definitely let me know what you think. I don't think this is something I feel like super, like, this is the right answer. This is just sort of me kind of posing this as a question and opening it up for debate. So I always welcome civil discourse in my comments, so feel free to engage there. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I think that will do it. I hope you are having a really lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!